My sister and I graduated from college together, but my parents only paid for her tuition. She deserved it, but you didn't. Those words were years in the making, written in small invisible cuts that began long before college, back when 4 minutes decided who mattered. My name is Lydia Foster, and I was born 4 minutes after Nina Foster in a quiet Atlanta hospital. To everyone else, those minutes meant nothing. To my parents, Gerald and Susan Foster, they became a lifetime's difference. Nina came first, the soft one, the delicate miracle. I followed, loud and healthy, already labeled the strong one. Strength became the excuse they used to love me less. When Nina cried, Mom rushed to hold her. When I fell, Dad told me to brush it off. Birthdays came with matching cakes but mismatched gifts. Nina unwrapped new dresses. I got the ones she'd outgrown. Every photograph in our living room seemed to tilt toward her smile. Only Grandma Mabel noticed the shadows I hid behind perfect report cards and polite silence. She'd squeeze my hand and whisper, "You shine in your own way, sweetheart." I wanted to believe her, but silence became safer than hope. As we grew older, I learned that affection in our house wasn't shared, it was earned. And no matter how hard I tried, the scales never moved. So, I stopped waiting for balance. I started building my own. If you've ever felt unseen in your own family, tell me in the comments. Your story might help someone find their strength too. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that remind you you're never alone. By the time the heat of that summer began to fade, I stood in front of the university gates with one suitcase and too much silence between me and my family. Atlanta's air was thick, heavy with the smell of new beginnings, except mine came with the weight of debt. Nina's move-in day was a celebration. Mom decorated her dorm with fairy lights, Dad carried boxes, and every photo they took found its way online within hours. My day came a week later. There were no photos, no decorations, no words, only a short message from Mom that read, "You'll figure it out, Lydia. You always do." That single sentence became my unofficial scholarship. While Nina unpacked designer bedding in her private room, I settled into a small dorm shared with 3 other students. My scholarship covered tuition, but not the living costs that kept piling up like unanswered questions. By day, I studied accounting. By night, I shelved books in the campus library until the halls turned ghostly quiet. Sometimes, after closing, I stayed to wipe down tables just to earn a few extra dollars. I thought of Mom's voice saying I was strong, and wondered when strength had turned into an excuse for neglect. Every night, my body ached with exhaustion, but my pride refused to bend. If Nina's world was comfort, mine was calculation, every cent, every hour, every unspoken resentment carefully accounted for. On weekends, I worked at a cafe near downtown, the kind where people ordered $5 lattes and left $1 tips. I smiled through fatigue, reminding myself this was temporary. Yet some nights, walking back to the dorm with shoes damp from rain and the taste of coffee still clinging to my hands, I questioned if effort ever truly evened the odds. Nina's life, meanwhile, unfolded like a glossy magazine spread. New friends, road trips, brunch photos, parties under string lights. Her happiness looked effortless, her face always framed by other smiling faces. My phone stayed silent except for Grandma Mabel's Sunday calls. Her voice was the only one that asked, "Are you eating enough? And are you sleeping at all?" I told her I was fine, though the word felt dishonest. Fine didn't describe missing meals to buy textbooks or using secondhand clothes while Nina rotated wardrobes. Still, Grandma's faith in me was the quiet warmth I carried into every late-night shift. Months slipped into semesters. My grades stayed high, my circle stayed small, and my heart hardened in ways I didn't fully understand. When I passed the administration office and overheard my parents' name on Nina's billing account, it stung less than I expected. The wound had stopped bleeding. It had simply turned to scar. In the spring, the campus bloomed again, dogwood trees dusting the walkways in white petals. I took my usual seat in the library's back corner, surrounded by the soft hum of printers and whispers of students cramming for finals. The screen of my old laptop flickered, dim but faithful. I was updating my resume when the email notification appeared. Subject: Recommendation Request, Professor Daniel Cross. For a moment, I thought it was a mistake. Then I opened it, and a quiet surge rose through me, a spark I hadn't felt in years. Professor Cross, one of the department's toughest instructors, was offering me a chance to apply for an assistantship. It wasn't money yet, but it was recognition, an opening carved out of all my nights of silence. The exhaustion that had shadowed me for months shifted into something else: resolve. I leaned back, staring at the glow of the screen, and whispered to myself, maybe this is where things start to change. The semester turned colder. and the campus took on that gray stillness that only comes before exams. In those weeks, the library became my second home. I lived among stacks of books and the steady hum of fluorescent lights, measuring my life in pages rather than days. That was where Professor Daniel Cross first noticed me. He taught advanced financial reporting, a class most students dreaded but I secretly loved. His lectures demanded precision, the kind of precision that punished laziness and rewarded quiet endurance. Perhaps that was why he remembered my name. I never sought attention. It found me when I was too busy surviving to care. When Professor Cross asked me to stay after class one evening, I thought I had made a mistake on an assignment. Instead, he spoke about consistency, about the rare kind of persistence he saw in a handful of students each year. He said he was looking for an assistant. My name was on his list. From that day, my routine changed. Mornings began with lectures, afternoons belonged to spreadsheets and grading summaries, evenings returned me to my job at the library. Somewhere between exhaustion and discipline, I discovered rhythm. Working for him didn't just mean experience, it meant recognition, something I had chased all my life without realizing. Professor Cross was calm but exacting. Every number had to tell the truth, every report had to breathe clarity. He never gave praise easily, but his silence felt heavier than my parents' indifference because his silence carried expectation, not disregard. I learned to read it, to respect it, to answer it with my best work. Then came the talk about the Hamilton Scholarship. It was the most prestigious national grant for accounting students offered to only 5 recipients each year. Professor Cross mentioned it casually, as if speaking to the air, but his eyes rested on me long enough for hope to take root. He didn't promise anything. He didn't need to. When the official notice arrived in my inbox, requesting application materials, I realized he had already nominated me. No warning, no discussion, just quiet faith. For the first time, someone had acted in my favor without needing me to beg for it. The requirements were steep: a written essay, detailed academic records, recommendation letters, and proof of leadership beyond grades. Each night, after finishing my assistant duties, I sat at my desk in the dim dorm light, writing drafts that blurred between ambition and confession. I wrote about resilience without calling it pain, about independence without calling it abandonment. Every paragraph felt like reopening a wound and stitching it closed again. Still, it was the kind of ache that promised healing. Days bled into nights. My classmates complained about deadlines, but I found peace in the weight of my work. It was the first time effort felt like freedom, not punishment. I didn't tell Mom, Dad, or Nina about the scholarship. Their silence had trained me not to seek their interest. Success, I decided, would mean more when no one expected it. When the essay was done, I printed it at the library after hours, the printer's hum echoing through the empty room. The final line read, "I have learned that recognition is not given, it is built, word by word, like trust." I slipped the papers into an envelope addressed to the National Committee, and stood there for a long moment. My hands trembled not with fear, but with the strange clarity of someone who finally knows where they belong. It wasn't hope anymore, it was proof. I sealed the envelope and walked it to the late-night mail drop. The sound of it landing inside was barely audible, but in that soft thud, I felt years of being overlooked finally settle into purpose. By early spring, the letter arrived. The header carried the Hamilton Foundation seal, a silver crest embossed on thick paper that felt heavier than anything I'd ever held. For a second, I couldn't breathe. Then the words came into focus. "We are pleased to inform you." The scholarship wasn't just a financial award, it was validation carved into sentences. Years of late nights and quiet endurance condensed into one letter that finally called me seen. I sat there, the air trembling around me, realizing that all those invisible hours had led to this proof that persistence could, after all, rewrite fate. Later that evening, another email followed from the committee. An invitation to the national ceremony in Atlanta, attended by industry leaders, professors, and families. We encourage recipients to bring their parents. Parents. The word tasted unfamiliar. I stared at it until the letters blurred. For days, I hesitated to reach out. I wrote messages, deleted them, rewrote them again. My heart argued that they wouldn't care, but some small, childish fragment still wanted them to witness what I had become without them. Finally, I dialed the home number. Mom answered first, her voice as calm and distant as ever. I told her about the scholarship, the award, the ceremony. There was a pause, then a flat, "That's nice, Lydia. When is it?" Dad's voice echoed faintly in the background, asking something I couldn't make out. She relayed it casually. "Your father says congratulations." It should have been enough. but the silence that followed pressed harder than words. When I hung up, the joy shrank into something quieter, still there, but bruised. They hadn't asked how I felt, what it meant, or how hard it had been. Just logistics. Just politeness. Still, I sent them the invitation by mail. Not out of hope, but closure. The days leading up to the ceremony passed in a blur of preparation. The foundation sent an itinerary: morning reception, keynote address, award distribution, luncheon. I read it like a manual, not an event. I bought a black dress, modest, secondhand, carefully pressed. I practiced my walk, my posture, my breathing. Every movement became deliberate, measured, rehearsed dignity. When the day arrived, Atlanta's skyline shimmered under a pale blue sky. I took the early bus downtown, the city already awake with the noise of commuters. The event hall loomed like a glass cathedral, its doors reflecting sunlight so bright it almost blinded me. I adjusted my bag and stepped inside. The lobby smelled of polished wood and expensive perfume. Volunteers in navy suits handed out name tags. Mine read, Lydia Foster, Hamilton Scholar. For a moment, I just stared at it. Seeing my name printed that way felt surreal, like meeting a version of myself I had been chasing for years. Inside the hall, clusters of families filled the rows, parents fixing ties, siblings taking photos, laughter bouncing against the chandeliers. My seat card rested at the front, near the stage. I looked around, searching without really knowing why, until my eyes caught a familiar pair of faces near the back. Mom, Dad, and Nina. They looked out of place in the glittering crowd. Mom's expression was composed but uncertain, Dad's posture rigid, Nina's face unreadable. For the first time, I wasn't sure whether they were proud or simply curious. The lights dimmed. A hush settled over the room. The host's voice echoed from the microphone, clear and warm. Names were being called, one after another, students stepping forward, smiling, shaking hands, accepting plaques. Applause rolled like waves across the hall. I sat still, hands folded in my lap, heart thrumming in my chest. Each name that passed brought me closer to my own. When the spotlight shifted to the next section, the announcer spoke words that made time slow. And now, please welcome our next recipient, Miss Lydia Foster. The applause that filled the room was thunder wrapped in light. I rose from my seat, my name still echoing through the microphone, and for the first time, I didn't feel small beneath it. The sound wasn't polite. It was genuine, heavy, and alive. As I stepped toward the stage, the world seemed to slow. I could see flashes of faces, hands clapping, the soft glimmer of camera lights. My pulse drummed against my ribs. Every step forward felt like reclaiming years of silence that had once defined me. When I reached the podium, the dean smiled and began reading from the notes in his hand. His voice carried across the hall. Lydia Foster, recipient of the Hamilton Scholarship, is recognized for her perseverance, academic excellence, and self-reliance. Without financial support from her family, she balanced 2 part-time jobs while maintaining the highest GPA in her department. A murmur rippled through the audience. Some heads turned toward where my parents. Saturday, I didn't need to look to know. I could feel their stillness from across the hall, the kind of stillness that follows disbelief. Then, almost involuntarily, my eyes found them. Mom's face was pale, her usual composure replaced by something raw and unfamiliar. Dad sat rigid, hands clasped, staring at the stage as if he couldn't recognize the person standing there. And Nina for once wasn't smiling. Her expression held confusion and maybe, buried beneath it, a flicker of envy. The dean continued reading about my volunteer work, my research contributions, and how I'd earned national recognition. Each word felt like a soft knife turning, not out of cruelty, but justice. Years of imbalance silently corrected themselves under those chandeliers. When he handed me the plaque, the weight in my hands wasn't just the award, it was the proof that I had survived. I bowed slightly, thanked him, and turned toward the audience. The applause swelled again, louder, warmer. I stood under the lights and let it wash over me. For the first time, I didn't shrink from it. I didn't smile for the cameras. I didn't search for their approval. I just stood still, breathing in a moment that was entirely mine. After the ceremony, the room transformed into a blur of movement, students posing for pictures, journalists interviewing, sponsors exchanging cards. I moved through the crowd with quiet poise, shaking hands, answering questions, pretending not to notice the stares that followed me. When I caught sight of Professor Cross, he gave a small nod from across the room. No words, no gestures, just acknowledgement. That was enough. His belief had opened the door, but I had built the path that led here. Representatives from several accounting firms approached, their voices polite, their offers promising. I accepted their business cards carefully, slipping them into my bag as though they were delicate glass. Success felt new on my skin, sharp but clean. Somewhere in the background, I saw Mom, Dad, and Nina standing together near the exit. They looked smaller than I remembered. For years, I had wanted them to see me. Now they did, but not the way they expected. The irony was almost tender. I had once begged for their recognition. Now it arrived too late to matter. As the evening light streamed through the tall windows, the floor shimmered in gold. I realized I no longer needed them to stay or to leave. Their presence or absence had lost its power over me. The ceremony ended with a final round of applause, and when the crowd began to disperse, I stepped outside into the evening air. The city hummed softly around me, distant and alive. The plaque in my hands gleamed beneath the fading sunlight. It was strange, standing there alone yet feeling whole. All the noise, the years, the longing they had led to this stillness. And somewhere behind those closed glass doors, I knew their faces were still pale. The hall emptied slowly, like a tide pulling back from the shore. I remained seated for a moment longer, surrounded by the echo of applause that had already faded. The air still shimmered with the residue of recognition, but the silence that followed felt heavier than any sound. When I finally stood, I noticed them waiting near the side aisle, Mom, Dad, and Nina. They looked uncertain, as though rehearsing a scene they didn't understand. For years I had imagined what this moment might feel like, but now it carried no sweetness, only stillness. They walked toward me, cautious, awkward. Their expressions searched my face for a version of me that no longer existed. I had outgrown the version they ignored. Mom's lips moved, but I didn't hear the words. Maybe she was apologizing, maybe she wasn't. It didn't matter. I watched her gestures, the same careful precision she used when decorating Nina's childhood recitals, when she smiled for everyone else's pride. Now that smile wavered. I realized I didn't want it anymore. Dad's hand tightened around the award plaque I had let him hold. His grip looked unsure, as if the metal might burn. For once, he seemed smaller than I remembered a man stripped of certainty. I almost pitied him. Almost. Nina stood slightly behind them, her eyes darting between us, unsure where to look. There was something fragile in her face, fear, maybe guilt, but also confusion. She had lived her entire life under the illusion of being loved more. Now she understood the weight of being compared to someone who no longer cared. I felt no triumph, no vengeance, just release. They said something: praise, excuses, perhaps regret. I nodded out of courtesy, but my thoughts were already elsewhere. Years of waiting for their affection had built a wall between us that could no longer be climbed. I had spent too long trying to be worthy of something they never intended to give. As I left the hall, the city outside looked sharper under the evening lights. Atlanta glowed in a way I hadn't noticed before. Maybe the world had always been this clear, and I had just been too focused on the fog they left behind. In the following days, emails arrived, job offers from firms impressed by the scholarship. Among them was one from a major auditing company downtown. I accepted without hesitation. It felt symbolic, to begin a new life in the same city where my old one had finally ended. Packing my dorm room took less time than I thought. Most of what I owned could fit into 2 suitcases, and one memory I refused to carry. Mom called once, Dad twice. I didn't answer. Nina sent a text that said, "I'm proud of you," followed by another that said, "I hope we can talk." I read them both, then deleted them. I realized that closure doesn't always arrive as forgiveness. Sometimes, it's the decision to stop reopening the wound. On my last night in the dorm, I stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker like distant constellations. The plaque rested on my desk, catching reflections of neon and moonlight. For the first time, I wasn't looking for approval, direction, or acknowledgement. I was simply breathing. When the clock reached midnight, I turned off my phone. The silence was pure. It was the sound of choosing myself. Tomorrow, I would wake up in a different apartment, start a different job, and live a life that didn't depend on anyone's permission to exist. No tears, no speeches, no reconciliation. Just distance and the peace that finally came with it. Morning came with a cleaner kind of quiet. In the months that followed, routine became a refuge I no longer apologized for. I moved into a modest apartment near Midtown, close enough to feel the city's pulse, but far enough to hear myself think. The firm's office tower rose like a mirror of glass, and every weekday, I walked into its lobby with a calm that surprised me. Work offered sharp edges, deadlines, audits, numbers that refused to lie. Those edges taught me how to stand upright without bracing against old walls. I learned the cadence of independence: rent before comfort, savings before celebration, sleep when the work was clean. My desk faced a window that poured sunlight over case files and spreadsheets, and sometimes I caught my reflection in the glass someone without apologies. Recognition shifted from applause to quiet mastery. I came early because I wanted to. I stayed late when the task demanded it. I left on time when the job deserved a full stop. The rhythm felt honest. News of Mom, Dad, and Nina reached me in fragments: community updates, distant relatives, occasional glimpses through the social noise I seldom visited. Consequences unfolded without spectacle. The neighbors who once admired their curated normalcy stopped asking for photos at holidays. Friends who had praised Nina's easy charm now measured her by outcomes she struggled to produce. Respect moved away from them the way tide leaves a sandcastle, slowly, evenly, without pity. For Nina, the years turned heavy in ways she didn't predict. She cycled through short-term roles and temporary contracts, always almost arriving. The ease that once cushioned her steps dissolved under expectations she hadn't trained for. Independence is awkward when it comes late. It lands like a suitcase in a small hallway with nowhere to go. I wished her clarity, but not at the cost of my peace. As for Mom and Dad, their home grew quieter. The constant choreography of keeping one daughter comfortable and the other invisible had left them fluent in avoidance, not intimacy. Without my presence, that choreography broke. I heard they tried new routines, volunteering, dinners with old friends, but behind those attempts, something remained unpracticed: accountability. Even in their softer years, solitude can feel heavier when it wears the shape of your choices. I never wrote or called. No anniversaries, no holidays, no birthdays. Boundaries are not punishments. They are instructions for survival. I kept mine without apology. There is a difference between spite and distance. One drains, the other restores. On Sundays, I kept a promise to myself. I mentored 2 scholarship students at a local community center, first generation, resourceful, stubborn in the best way. I read their essays, revised their resumes, and watched them learn to speak clearly about their own talent without shrinking. It felt like repairing a bridge I never got to cross. If no one would have chosen me then, I could choose someone now. Sometimes I passed the university on late walks home from the office. The campus looked ordinary under streetlights, benches, brick, the soft geometry of buildings. I thought about the person who once studied in those silent corners, who believed love had to be earned with perfect grades and flawless restraint. I forgave her for trying so hard. She got me here. No contact never turned bitter. It became a climate stable, breathable, predictable. I no longer looked for their names in my inbox. I no longer rehearsed speeches in the shower. I no longer imagined what they might feel if they saw me succeed. Victory felt different when it no longer needed witnesses. One evening, I placed the scholarship plaque inside a drawer and closed it softly. The achievement had done its work. I didn't need the reminder. The lesson had outgrown the symbol. Survival is not the whole story. Eventually, you have to live. What did this teach me? That love without fairness becomes a debt you can never repay. That silence is a language, and you have the right to refuse fluency. That success means little if it only proves your worth to the wrong audience. Most of all, it taught me that cutting ties isn't cruelty, it's clarity. If this story gave you something to hold: courage, a boundary, a breath, share your thoughts below. Your perspective might be the lantern someone else needs. Thank you for listening to mine. If you'd like more true-to-life stories about finding your value, consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Your support helps these voices be heard.